The wonderful Annalie Wombeek will be one of our speakers for our Be for Burnout event, and I'm really happy to be joined by her today. Annalie is a trainer, speaker, and facilitator specializing in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. With a rich background as a third culture kid and interculturalist, Annalie draws from her lived experience across continents and her academic studies in sociology, cultural studies, and international relations. Thank you for joining me, Annalie.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Nicolette.
Can you share with us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Of course, I was born in Sweden and I am part Sri Lankan, part English. And growing up as a child, we moved every 3 years. So I've lived in Spain and Kashmir and Sweden and all over the world. And then I went to Sri Lanka when I was 14, and that's where I finished secondary school. But the reason I'm telling you that is because I really struggled for a few years on where do I belong? And I didn't realize that the thread that runs through all my work experience and everything I do is really focused on inclusion and belonging because I felt what it's like not to belong. So I'm now a freelance DEI trainer, as you said, and I consider it a huge privilege that I get to use my background and my lived experience for the work that I do on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. I love that. The lived experience is so important in terms of what we do. So, how does stress and burnout show up in diverse workplaces, and how can they impact individuals differently?
I think for me, this is a question that I can speak on from personal experience. I worked in the finance sector in the Netherlands, and I was not aware of what a burnout was. I'd heard the term, but I didn't really, in a way, you could say I didn't really believe in it because in Sri Lanka, people don't burn out. That's not a thing that happens. So I was working in a very good job. I had great colleagues. Everything around me on paper seemed perfect, really. It's what a lot of people would aspire to, I think. And for me, it was only after my manager said, look, you are severely burnt out, you need to go off sick tomorrow, that I kind of acknowledged and realized that I had been living with what I considered low levels of stress, but actually it was an accumulation of many years of not feeling like I belonged in an environment. And that was nothing on my colleagues or my workplace. It was really, I didn't feel like I was in a space where I could be myself. And that actually led to almost a year that I was off on burnout leave, which for me came with a lot of mixed emotions and feelings, primarily guilt, because I felt I didn't have the right to burn out.
Yeah.
There were so many people in arguably, worse situations, job-wise, working more hours, and I felt really guilty. How could I burn out? Did I have the right to burn out? Eventually materialized for me into a burnout. And that is where I started doing some research on, is burnout a cultural phenomena? Do we all experience it? So it was through my own journey of, in hindsight, of course, a very unpleasant experience. But for me, it was the best thing that ever happened to me because it has led me now to working for myself and to really being able to live into my values, which I consider a huge privilege as well.
I love that way that you've turned it around and it's become a positive for you. And also the interesting way that you talk about the fact that it's a privilege to burn out, even though you've burnt out yourself. So I think that's really going to be interesting when we get into the detail of that at our events. So I think many women from multicultural or marginalized backgrounds, can you talk a little bit more about the things that they may experience that can contribute to their burnout?
Definitely. I think one of the definitions of burnout is carrying too much for too long. And that really resonated with me. And I think it also resonates with women in particular who maybe come from a different cultural background and have a lot of cultural pressures as well as work pressures on them. Often, we feel like we need to do more just to meet the bare minimum, which often ends up why we're often overdoing. It can lead us to believe, or at least for myself, that this is the level that you need to be working at to kind of keep up with everybody else, living in two very different environments at home and at work. But I do think being from a background that's not the dominant one, wherever in the world you are, it forces you to adapt. And I think that process of adaptation with yourself at the center, you can kind of end up losing who you are, which is something that I definitely felt because I was trying so hard to adapt and to fit in. I kind of lost who I was. And I think that is an experience, anecdotally, from what I've heard from other women, that I think they share as well.
I certainly resonate with that hugely in terms of trying so hard to fit in, thinking I had to work harder. And it's so interesting when you say that it's self imposed, which is something I hadn't thought about before. I think often you think it's just the external factors,
Mm.
but it does start from within, which I think is really interesting. So, for women navigating environments where they feel like they don't belong, what advice do you have for them without giving away what you're going to be talking about to help them maintain their sort of resilience and overall well being?
I think firstly, I do think it's very important to understand that there are certain things that we can manage on our own. And I think it's great for women to be empowered to be able to question, what gives me energy? That was a question that I was asked when I was on sick leave, and it had honestly never occurred to me. Here in the Netherlands, it's a very common question. And for me, even being asked that, I thought, well, I work because I need to, I work because I need a salary. Should work be the thing that's giving me energy?
Yeah.
But I think my advice for women who is to look inwards first. That's, of course, easier said than done. I was in the Netherlands when I had my burnout, so I did have access to a psychologist and a psychiatrist. I do understand that not everybody has access to that. So, what I would say is there are amazing resources now online. There are some great podcasts around burnout. And it starts with awareness. And for me, if more women can be aware that the state they're operating in, what are some of the measures that they can take either to change the burdens that are on their plate or to reprioritize and to put themselves higher up the list in terms of priorities, the practical steps of how you can do that when you are sometimes in an environment that doesn't support that is something I look forward to going into in our session together, both online and in person. I think my overall experience leads me to believe that where possible, there are things you can do for yourself, but we shouldn't underestimate the real need sometimes for support from qualified professionals as well.
It's interesting you talked about the measurable side of things. One of our speakers will be running an exercise on that I think will be hugely valuable to the women attending. I'm loving the fact we've got such a broad range of speakers. So why do you think women should attend these events that we're hosting on Be for Burnout, the story of stress?
There's quite a unique opportunity for women to be able to talk about issues, in this case, burnout and stress, in an environment that is safe, it's accommodating, or hopefully women who attend will not feel the need to filter themselves. A way that I would have recognized the signs of burnout were if I saw other people like me. I didn't think people of color burnt out. Of course, in my logical brain, I know the symptoms are universal, but I hadn't seen anyone else who looked like me who had gone through that. I think offering spaces like this, it allows women to hear from a variety of perspectives. And that's what I'm really looking forward to for this event. All of our speakers, and we all come at things from quite a different perspective. So I'm hoping what attendees will gain is they will resonate and be able to see maybe a little bit more of themselves that we share. And I know that you also want this to be very interactive. So I'm looking forward to really getting to hear from the women in the room. Hopefully, what people would gain is a sense of community, which I think is extremely important, and in a safe and nurturing environment.
Well, I'm really looking forward to the events and having you on stage. The Be for Burnout events will take place on Tuesday, the 26th at Equals and online on the 3rd of December. Details will be in the notes below. And we look forward to you joining us at either of those events. Thank you so much, Annalie, for joining me for this chat. I've really enjoyed it.
Likewise, looking forward to sharing more and hearing all the other speakers too. Thank you, Nicolette.